Welcome back. In this video, our aim is to install Postgres and also Docker, and then we would try as much as possible to deploy and containerize our previous application, our previous API we built, to put it in a Docker. All right. But first, what is even Postgres? Postgres is a database where we store our data. Simply put, as simple as that, right? So the next question would then be, what is Docker? Now, I want to use an analogy of a car, for example, to explain what Docker is. Now, imagine you have a car and you want to drive that car anywhere. However, if you try to take that car overseas, you might have a lot of issues. You might face a lot of problems. For example, you might face issues with the fuel, incompatibility of the road, or even varying size of parking spot, for example. Now, in software, this problem is similar. Moving your application from one machine to another, which is in this case one environment to another environment, can be problematic due to dependencies and configuration issues. Right? Now, Docker acts like your shipping container for your car, for example. Regardless of where you go, your car, in this case your application, is neatly packaged with everything it needs, be it the libraries, the runtime, the configuration. This ensures that it works perfectly the same way in every environment, whether it's your local computer or server or maybe the cloud. Then you don't have to worry about incompatibility issues or issues with environment. All right. Now, without further ado, let's just jump into trying to install our Postgres, and then we install our Docker, and then we deploy our Docker. Now, just to reiterate this series of videos will be a long one, because our aim is to try as much as possible to create industry standard application where we have a lot of microservices talking to themselves, inclusive of the API gateway and all those stuff. All right. So let's just stop right into it. To install Postgres, just go to Google and type in PostgreSQL download, for example. All right. And just you could just click on it, or maybe just click on Windows installer if you're using a Windows installer, or a Linux download, for example. But let's just click on the downloads. Okay. Here it's gonna bring it to your operating system. I'm using a Windows operating system, so I'm just gonna click on Windows. All right. I will do a download, the installer. All right. I can use any version, but let me just use the latest version, which is 17.0. All right. I already have that downloaded. So let me just go into my download and double click it. Now, it might probably ask me for some security questions. Let's see. Yes. Do you want to allow this app to make changes to your devices? Yes. Let's click that. And yep, there you go. It's coming up. Good. So this is the wizard for the installer, and what we want to do is just click next here. You could decide to change what directory you want it installed on. Doesn't really matter. Here I want to install the server, definitely, and I want to install the pgadmin, which is like the interface for installing, I mean for the like a UI or interface for it. But if you don't want to install the interface and you just want to use command, it's also fine, right? But I want the pgadmin, and I want the server, I want the stack builder, and I want the command line tool too. All right. Yeah, you could also change this directory. This is the directory where the server, I mean the data, is going to be saved. I'll just leave it default, and you create a custom password, right? You just create, it says please provide a password for your database super user, which is super admin. So in my case, I'm just going to put a password, for example. It doesn't really matter. Okay, so next. And what port do you want to use? Yeah, you could decide to change your port, but I'll just use a default port. Yeah, select the local. I'm just going to default local, and let's install. This is just to confirm everything, and then we do next. Setup is ready to begin, and then it should start installing. I'm just going to pause the video while this goes on. All right. So depending on your processing power of your computer and your memory, for example, it depends. So it might take a while for you, but for me it took some couple of minutes and it's installed. And you might probably want to check this or leave it, but it says Stack Builder may be used to download and install additional tools and drivers and applications. I don't need more, so I just want to check it and then just finish this. Now, to open this, just go to your and type in pgadmin. That was the interface we installed earlier, and you should see something like this come up just to show you pgadmin. Now, our aim is just to install it for today. Would use it again in subsequent classes and subsequent videos. All right, so it's up and running. Now you have installed your pgadmin. You need to just enter your password, the one we used earlier, and then you're good to go. Now you have a database installed. All right, now let's jump into installing and setting up Docker. Now to install Docker, just go to Google, just the same way we did for Postgres, and type in Docker download. All right, we just picked the first one, Docker desktop. All right, download Docker desktop. Let's do that. We're using a Windows 64, right? And this is what it looks like, by the way. But it's downloading. Okay. All right, that's done. And you double click or you click, whichever way. And it will ask you, do you want to allow this app to make changes? Yes, click yes. Then you should have a Docker desktop pop up like this, trying to install this. Okay, so now I'll just leave everything default. It's asking, do you want to use WSL2 instead of Hyper-V? Yes, I want to use WSL. Now WSL gives me the privilege to use, if I want to use Ubuntu or Linux operating systems on my Windows, I could do that, right? So do you want to add shortcuts to desktop? Yes, I want to do that. I click OK. And this also will take a while, so I'm just going to put the video on pause again. Instead of putting the video on pause, let us make use of that time, right? So let's go to our previous application. Let us prepare our application for the Docker, right? So how do you do that? The first thing you need to do is create a Docker file, right? It's just, you go to the base or the root or the base of your application, right click it, click on new, and you want to create a file. Here we want to create a Docker file, DOCKER, and a file, right? Good. So now we have our Docker file. It wants to install a Docker plugin. If you want, install the plugin. If you want, you can ignore extension. Let's just install the plugin, just so we have a lint that aligns properly. While he's doing that, the first line we want is from. We want to use the from because we want to use Java 21. So we do open JDK. Okay, so it's going to give you different options here, and that's because we already have the plugin installed. So we want to do open JDK 21. Okay, let's do 21. Let's use the slim version. All right, now I'm just going to tell you what each line does. This particular line, what it does is it specifies the base image with Java 21. So let's just say the base image that will be running this on will be Java 21, right? Specifies the base image with Java 21. Okay, that's what that line does. All right, the next line that we need is to create our directory in the container where everything will be installed, right? So let me just do that. Step by step, right? So this is step 2, and the step 2 is to set we want to set our working directory. All right, so how do you do that? You want to do a work directory. and we use the /app. All right. Then the third thing we want to do is we want to copy our jar file when the jar file is being created, right? We want to copy it from the target folder. If you remember from the last class, it's always sitting in the target folder. So we want to move it from the target folder into our work directory. And how do you do that? First off, our third thing is to copy the Spring Boot. I want to copy the Spring Boot jar into the container. All right. So how do you do that? We use the copy. Okay. And then we do a target. Now, what is the name of our file? Let's go into target. We should be able to see the name of our file. Oh, we haven't generated the file. So how do you do that? Just do a Maven clean package. All right. I should do it. Awesome. So we've generated our jar file, which is this first API, then with a snapshot of 00. All right. So let's just pick that first API with this one. All right. And then we want to copy it and just name it app, or let's just name it first API.jar. Good. The next step is we want to see what port our API is using, right? So let's go back to check what port are we using. Did we ever change the port? Or so we're using the default port 8080, right? All right, so let's just stick with the default port 8080, which is fine. There's no issues using that. All right, so we then go back into the Docker file, and then we want to expose the port we're using, or else we might not be able to use the port, right? So let's just do, why do we need this line? Expose the port on which the Spring Boot app runs. Okay, and now do you do that? We do expose. That's all you need. And we do 8080. That's all. Now the last thing we need to do is we want to run our application, right? If we need to run our application, what do we need to do? We need to run the jar file. Now it's good to learn how to run the jar files or the Spring Boot application using command line, and that's where this comes into play. That's where you would need this, right? All right, and there's a mistake here. All right, good. Now, so what we want to do next is to specify the command to run the application, right? So how do you do that? Good. So how to do that is just do an entry point, okay? And then we want bracket, and then we want to do a Java because we're using Java, right? And then jar okay, and then we want to, if you remember from this place, we already changed the name of our jar file, and then we want to specify the name of our jar file. Simple as that. Okay. All right, so let's go back to our Docker. Now Docker is done installing, and we might probably want us to restart our computer, which we will do and then come back. All right, so after restarting the computer, it's going to show you some pop-ups like accepting the agreement, asking you if you want to make changes to, if you want the app to make changes to your computer, just click yes. Doesn't really matter. And then depending on your processing power, it's going to take time to start the engine. And as soon as it starts the engine, you see this green says engine running, and then we're good to go. Okay, so the next thing we need to do is just try to see how to deploy our application into the Docker. So let's go back to the API we wrote. Now we're done with the Docker file, and that's what you need. And there you might make more changes to this depending on what you're doing, right? You might want to expose different kind of maybe credentials or whatever you want to do. But in this case, we're just making it simple as we need. All right, so the first thing we want to do is we want to build the image itself. How do you do that? You want to do docker build, all right, -t, and then you want to build your first API, right? So we want to name it first API. That, all right. So while we do that, it's just going to download all the dependencies that it needs to download. So for example, we specify JDK 21, the slim version. Now it's downloading the JDK version. It's going to do all those steps that we, now it's doing the work directory. So and then it's doing the copy. You just copied the jar file and renamed it, and then it's done. Okay, so let's go back into our Docker and see what we have. So now we have that particular image. All right, so we have the first API image. Now how do you start this? We can just come here and click on the start of the play. It doesn't really matter, but let's just start it from the command line. And how to do that is just do a docker, and then we want to run -p. Now what this is doing is we want to run it on a port. Since we have port 8080, right? We then want to map that port 8080 to 8080. You can map it to whatever you want, so it doesn't really matter. So in my case, I'm just making it simple, port 8080 to 8080, right? And then we want to run our first API, right? So that's what we want to run. So let's do that. Good. So it's running in Docker right now. Let's now go to the Docker container again. You see containers here, right? Just click on the containers, you see it. It's already running. You can always change the name. You can do a lot of things with the Docker, but again, I'm keeping it simple, right? So it says it's running. The status is running, and it is running on 8080. Of course, there are ways that you can run it in the background that you don't have to see all this. The Docker will do all this thing itself. We can always do that, right? We will do that in subsequent videos. No problems. But here now we have this, and let's just go into it and then see what we have. And now it's running the first API. It's running on port 8080, and remember, the same way we tested our application the last time, let's just test it again. If you remember, what we did was just to say the API, what the API does simply is just to return an hello word. All right, so in hello word, all right, it's coming here with hello word. Okay, now let's see if we have here, you see it's giving you some details on, it says in 1 milliseconds. All right, completed in 1 milliseconds. All right, so the API here, what it does is it by default returns hello world, but what if a name is supplied? For example, it should then return hello and the name. All right, so if you do that again, then you have hello AY. So again, it's going to give you how long. All right, I hope this is clear enough. All right, if you have any questions, if you have any question or issues, drop a message or a comment in the comment section and I'll respond to them. Once again, I'm super thrilled. Please subscribe, leave your comment, click the notification button to stay up to date with our new videos, and most importantly, share with your friends. So I'll see you in the next video.